In the mid-1980s, I was a 20-something spiritual agnostic, but I was becoming intrigued by the so-called alternative spiritualities, Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and something called Wicca, or modern paganism. During my walks in the woods, I had come to intuit a divine presence in nature, but I didn't have the knowledge or language to express what I was feeling. Then one day, in some long-forgotten book, I encountered the image you see here, and whammo! I was spellbound by this entity, which the text told me was Carnunos, the antlered god of the ancient Celts. This image of Carnunos was from a 2,000-year-old cauldron found buried in a bog in Denmark, a ritual relic that came to be known as the Gundestrup cauldron. I also realized this was one of the gods of my Irish ancestors. I wondered who crafted this image and what they were thinking or feeling when they fashioned that cauldron. More to the point, why did they put stag antlers on the head of this human who is sitting in a Buddha-like pose? A very potent clue is quite visible. Carnunos, which is Gaelic for horned one, is depicted among numerous animals, including a stag that sports the same type of antlers. Carnunos, we see, literally see, is a lord of the animals, a nature god, an earth god. Suddenly I realized I wasn't alone. Someone long ago, one of the tribe of my ancestors, had also intuited, sensed, felt that a wild divinity is present in nature, and that we humans could find communion with this divinity. This was a god that my ancient ancestors worshipped, and seeing those antlers on a human stirred a sense of deep communion between me, this entity, my roots, and nature herself. And so I began my path to becoming a modern pagan, someone who sees divinity in nature. So, what happened to me when I encountered that image of Carnunos, as you see here on my altar in my home? Why and how do images of gods, goddesses, spiritual entities, and otherworld realms affect us, if they do, more than, say, a painting of a landscape or flowers? Let's explore some possibilities. Virtually every culture around the world has some sort of creation myth, stories of how the gods, goddesses, or divinities created the cosmos, the world, and its creatures. The gods created us humans, but we humans also created the gods. Throughout human existence, we have felt, intuited, sensed, seen, or experienced evidence of the divine and the otherworld, and we have felt compelled to give it shape and form, not only through stories and the written word, but also through art and image. A passage in the Bhagavad Gita, that ancient sacred Hindu text, says, "It is much more difficult to focus on God as the unmanifested than it is God with form, due to the fact that human beings have the need to perceive via the senses." So it is that many of Hinduism's gods and goddesses are amply depicted in statuary and paintings. Here's my statue of Shiva Nataraja, the ancient Hindu god Shiva as cosmic dancer, creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe, the one who dances the never-ending cycle of time into being. I don't consider myself to be following a Hindu path, but over the past decade I've found myself connecting to some of the Hindu philosophy, especially Shiva Nataraja. When we see an image of a deity, is there something more happening than just the contemplation of the mere image of a god? Do artworks of the sacred connect with us on a deeper level? When I spent summers at my grandparents' house when I was growing up, my bedroom had a painting of Jesus knocking on a door that looked pretty much like this one. But I didn't grow up to become a Christian. And come to think of it, my grandparents weren't Christian. So why the hell did they have a painting of Jesus in their home? The image you see here is Eshu, the trickster Orisha, that is God, of the Yoruba people of West Africa. This was a gift to me from my late wife Cheryl, who was African American. James Wasserman, in his book Art and Symbols of the Occult, talks about the concept known as correspondence, which he says is an implicit interdependence of all things with all other things, the existence of multiple relationships between various aspects of nature's kaleidoscopic richness. As I explain that, this is the simple but profound concept that when you see, say, a painting or photo of a horse, you're not just looking at an image. Your subconscious mind is leapfrogging across all sorts of associations you've made with horses throughout your lifetime. A merry-go-round you rode as a kid, the chariot race in the movie Ben-Hur, policemen riding in a parade, that visit to a farm, the night piece in a chess set, and on and on. As Wasserman goes on to say, symbol and image are the alphabet of the theory of correspondence. Man is the image maker. This is the major characteristic that distinguishes us from other life forms. It is also the primary characteristic that relates us to higher consciousness. Image making is our link, by the theory of correspondence, to divinity. Sir James George Frazer, in his book The Golden Bough, talks about the law of similarity and also imitative magic. These are the ideas that if you create an image or representation of a being or object, then what is done within or to that image or likeness will have an effect in the real world. This is why some Native American tribes would carve or paint images of a rattlesnake on their arrowheads, so that their arrows would strike as quick and as deadly as rattlesnakes. This is my artwork derived from my photo of my Eshu statue, the statue that my late wife Cheryl gifted me. During our 23 years together, we often gifted Yoruba statuary and masks to each other. After Cheryl died in 2015, her daughter Jessica, my stepdaughter, had one of those DNA ancestry tests done and discovered her and Cheryl's heritage, their matriarchal lineage, is of the Fulani and Yoruba tribes from Nigeria. So yes, that made me think of all the many times Cheryl and I would gift each other Yoruba statuary, masks, and fetishes over the years. Then maybe it's not so amazing that we both were subconsciously connecting to Cheryl's roots. And so I go back to my reaction to Carnunos the first time I saw his image. When I would look at that painting of Jesus in my younger days at my grandmother's home, I didn't hear him knocking on the door. However, given my Irish roots, along with my newfound communion with nature, maybe it wasn't so mysterious that I instantly connected to an image of a Celtic earth god that very likely had been worshipped by my ancient ancestors. Let's go back in time to what is very likely the world's oldest supernatural painting. This startling image seen here is a Paleolithic cave painting discovered with many others in southwestern France in 1940. Known as Lasco Cave, the complex of caverns is home to some 1,400 engravings and 600 paintings. Archaeologists say that most of them were created 19,000 years ago. This scene, from what archaeologists call the shaft of the dead man, depicts a wounded bison beside a nearby human figure with a bird's head, or else it's a human wearing a bird mask. Interpretations vary. The scene includes another curiosity, an upright pole or staff that is shorter than the trunk of the stick figure Birdman and topped by a full-bodied bird slightly bigger than and just as crudely rendered as the human's bird head. What's going on here? The website of the Bradshaw Foundation is a magnificent resource on ancient rock art around the world. Its utterly comprehensive website includes sections on rock art theories such as art for art's sake, hunting magic, fertility magic, shamanism, and other theories about why these ancient artists created what they did. The shamanism entry reads, in a hunter-gatherer society, the shaman was a very important figure, priest, magician, healer, artist. As a messenger, medium, or emissary, the shaman's role was to make the extraordinary ordinary. The shaman could liaise between this world, the natural world, and the spirit world. It has been argued that in hunter-gatherer societies, the rock face itself was believed to be the interface, the veil, between these two worlds. However, the worlds themselves were not separate entities. The shaman would derive the life force from the animals in the spirit world and redirect that life force onto the people in the natural world. This theory of rock art proposes that Paleolithic images are spirit animals, not real animals, and that the composite figures represent shamans or sorcerers with masks. The very prominent mythologist Joseph Campbell agrees with this theory. The figure you see here, Campbell says, is not a hunter slain by a bull, but a shaman wrapped in trance. Speaking of shamans, let's hear from two modern-day artists who follow a pagan path, Paul B. Rucker and Helga Hedgewalker. When I interviewed them, I was not surprised to discover they each believe art is a magical act for themselves during the process of creation and, they hope, when viewers engage their works and those of other visionary artists. Here's what Rucker says. Creative flow is its own transcendent state. Making art can be a form of deep meditation. Sometimes the art-making trance becomes like lucid dreaming while awake. Mircea Eliade, the scholar of religions, described the shaman's journey as a round. The shaman goes from here, the ordinary world, to there, the spirit world or the other world, in order to receive a teaching, a vision, or have a profound experience of a heightened reality. To complete the round, the shaman must return with a medicine, a teaching, or something that will benefit the community. Rucker continues, this requires a technique of ecstasy, as Eliade called it. It's not so hard to go to the other world. People can take drugs or have altered consciousness in a number of ways. What's much harder is bringing something back that can be shared. Rucker's website includes his account of a vivid dream he had as a child, of a white stag, quote, that took me to a moonlit grove, wild and rambling, filled with the names of the gods and goddesses of the world. To stand anywhere in that holy place was to feel each divine personality completely. All were there, every divinity the human world had ever known, and the stag of the moon leading me on and on. Even then, I knew my task was to bring that magic back to this world, somehow, through making images. Close quotes. His need to make art, Rucker says, is, quote, my method of acquiring a technique of ecstasy so that the bits of sacred fire from the visionary plane could be held in something that others could engage with here in this world. This is Rucker's image of Melek-Taus, the Peacock Angel, a divinity of the Yazidi people of Syria. After this image went viral on the internet, and with all the responses that he was getting to the painting, Rucker came to believe that people saw this work as a, quote, true and authentic portal to the Peacock Angel, unquote. Rucker says his goal is to, quote, bring the wild magic of the otherworld into this one, close quote. This is Helga Hedgewalker's painting of Yamaya, the Yoruba goddess of the oceans. Helga says, usually I do my best work in a trance state, and when I can't achieve that flow, I believe the gods and goddesses make themselves known and I am merely a channel for them, she says. And what does she think about visionary art becoming a magical act for viewers? Good gods, I hope so, Helga says. This is Helga's painting titled Lord of Forest. Helga says, I have several paintings in my house where deities indwell in them. Their eyes follow me as I walk through the room. The art becomes gateways to their spiritual realm if the viewer is open to that experience. I don't know how often that happens, but sometimes the synchronicity of someone needing an image of exactly what I've just finished is intense enough to leave me reeling. It is gratifying and very humbling every time. Now let's take a quick tour of sacred art. Some of the following images are famous works, but most are from around my home, pieces I have collected or created myself. You'll probably recognize this work. It's from the Sistine Chapel, The Creation of Adam, painted by Michelangelo in the early 1500s. William Blake, the British poet, mystic, and painter, lived in the late 1700s and early 1800s. This painting is titled The Ancient of Days, and it depicts a figure that he called Urizen, U-R-I-Z-E-N, a deity that Blake himself invented as part of his own mythology. This is one of William Blake's Red Dragon paintings, which were inspired by the Christian Book of Revelation. This particular one is called The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed in the Sun. This is another William Blake painting. This one is titled The Great Red Dragon and the Beast from the Sea, painted in the early 1800s. This is one of the most famous paintings by Francisco Goya, the Spanish painter who lived from 1746 to 1828. The title of this work is Saturn Devouring His Son, which is his interpretation of the Greek myth in which the Titan Cronos, whom the Romans called Saturn, Saturn feared a prophecy that he would be overthrown by one of his children, and so Saturn ate each of his children as they were born. Yeah, pretty gruesome. This is a painting by George A.E. Russell, the Irish painter, poet, and mystic who lived from 1867 to 1935. Russell had quite an interesting relationship with the fairy folk in his native Ireland. He fervently believed in their existence, and when you see his paintings that portray the fairies, that is what he saw in the Irish landscape, and he painted them in his works. Speaking of Irish myth, this is a work by my girlfriend, artist Michelle Davidson, and this work is titled Valley of My Shadow. It's a collage that depicts the ancient Irish battle goddess known as the Morrigan. And myth says the Morrigan was able to shapeshift herself into the form of a crow. This is a work by Rosaline Norton, an Australian painter and witch who lived in the mid-20th century. This work is titled Individuation. This past Halloween at the Dollar Tree, I found these very cool Mexican Day of the Dead masks for $1. So I bought 2 or 3 of them, and then I took some selfies of myself wearing the mask, and then I put the digital woo-woo on them, as I call it, and to create this image here and some others like it. So yes, this is Rick as celebrating the Mexican Day of the Dead. This is an image of my late wife Cheryl as Durga, the fierce protective mother goddess of Hinduism. After Cheryl passed away, I asked my friend Jerry Sprankle to create an image of Cheryl as Durga, who has 8 arms in Hindu mythology. So Jerry created the initial image from photographs I had taken of Cheryl, and then I put the digital woo-woo on it to create this psychedelic, trippy image of Cheryl as the Hindu goddess. As some of you may know, I am under contract to write a book that is titled Crow Magic, Raven Magic. And it's about how different cultures around the world have seen crows and ravens as magical, mystical creatures, and they have figured prominently in the mythology of any number of cultures. And for me, myself personally, crows are very magical creatures. And so I created what I call my Mr. Crow series of art. And this is one of those. I take photos of crows and then I shapeshift them using various digital programs, and then I have them printed on canvases and I sell them and hang them up in my home. So as I said, crows are very magical creatures, and this is one way that I express my communion with them. This is a photo I took in Ireland when I visited there in 2005. It's of a standing stone on the Hill of Terra, and this pillar is dated to be at least 3,000 years old. It's difficult to tell in a photograph, and quite honestly, even in person, that this standing stone has an image of Carnunos on it. So of course, this is a very sacred place for me. And around my home, the many sacred artworks that I have exude the essence of the spiritual entities that each embodies. My Canunnos statuary, my dancing Shiva Nataraja figure, my wooden Eshu, the Yoruba trickster Orisha, my African American spring goddess, my Mexican Day of the Dead guitarist, masks from Bali, etc., etc. All these artifacts possess varying degrees of power and presence for me. Their power radiates not only through their physical presence and their visual symbology, but also through their subliminal effects on the vibrations and feng shui of a room, and through the myths that each embodies. These myths swirl in our subconsciousness upon the slightest notice of an icon or fetish or statuette or painting. Each day of my life, I pass by one or the other and take casual notice, and a small surge of their spiritual energy sparks through me. And sometimes it's a rather large, strong jolt. And once again, I am in communion with the otherworld, with cosmic consciousness, with divinity, even if only for a moment.